Chapter 6. Stampede. The buffalo were not only coming, they were thundering over the plains, heading for the river. If they crossed, they'd come ashore on the top of Abbott's camp. The cattle were already fretting, stomping the dirt. The oxen tugged at their yokes. "Amelia!" Sam called. He found her playing with a pan of bread dough Ma had set out to rise. Sam scooped her up in his arms and called to Lizzie, who was piling buffalo chips for the fire. "Leave that and come to the wagon," Pa says. "There's buffalo coming." Pa and the other men drew the wagons and livestock together. They hurried the women and children into the wagons, then took their guns and ducked behind some rocks to wait. Ma held baby Isaac close in one arm and circled the other tightly around Amelia. Ranger stayed close to her too. Lizzie leaned out the tailgate. "Won't they stop at the river?" Sam climbed over the trunks and barrels to look. The buffalo didn't stop. They stampeded over the open land down to the riverbank and plunged in, one after another. The water churned and frothed into a boiling mud stew as the animals crossed. Soon the first beasts were coming ashore, barreling towards the camp. They sounded like a great whooshing wind, like a storm blowing through, but instead of rain, the air was full of dust. "Oh, Lord, keep us safe," Ma whispered, and started humming her worry hymn. Pa and Mr. Harrigan fired their guns from behind the rocks, shooting into the stampede to try to scare the animals off their course. Pa's guidebook said that might work. If it didn't, Sam knew the whole camp could be destroyed. Henry and Ezra Beard stood side by side, firing into the herd, but the buffalo kept coming, as if they were covered in armor. Sam watched from the wagon. His heart thumped along with all those pounding hooves in the dirt. Every time one of the men's guns exploded, Sam's breath caught in his throat. "Turn! Turn!" He wheeled the buffalo to change course. If they didn't, they'd stomp the wagons into splinters. "Turn!" Paul fired his rifle again and again. Finally, one of the buffaloes stumbled and sank to the ground. The herd kept going, but the mass of animals veered away from the blast of the guns. Sam felt a hot breeze as they rushed past, trampling the dry grass. When the last of the herd had thundered off into the dust, Henry Beard let out a whoop. Pa and the other men jumped from the rocks. They ran toward the buffalo they'd taken down. Sam climbed down from the wagon bed. He slapped his thighs. "Come on, dog. Let's go see what they got." "Take this to your father." Ma handed Pa's big hunting knife down to Sam. "Be careful." Ranger leaped from the wagon and kept close to Sam. There had been so many huge animals. The air was still full of their smell. Ranger followed Sam up to the collapsed buffalo. Its legs were crumbled underneath its great body. Its fur was matted with dust and blood. Mr. Harrigan and some of the Gold Rush boys from Missouri turned the buffalo over to expose its soft belly. "We'll eat well tonight," Pa said. He bent down to pat Ranger's head. "You heard them coming, didn't you, dog? Good thing you let loose barking when you did." Sam handed Pa his knife, and Pa slit the buffalo's hide from its throat all the way down to its tail. Sam had to turn away, but later, after the sun had set and campfire smoke rose up into the clouds, he breathed in the grassy goodness of buffalo steaks sizzling over the fire. It was the fresh meat they'd had since they had set out from Independence. "This is a little bit of heaven," Mom said as she bit into the steak. "It's not very tender," Lizzie complained. But she ate every last bite of the sweet, dark meat on her tin plate. Sam finished his supper too and leaned back to look at the stars. He could hear the oxen and the horses snorting and shuffling. It had taken them a while to settle down. He could hear Mr. Harrigan tuning his fiddle. He could hear Pa and the Beard brothers laughing as they told the story of bringing the buffalo down. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out his quilt squares with the farmhouse and apple tree and Scout. What stories he'd have to write in his letters to everyone back home! Sam's belly was warm and full. His eyes were drooping when Sarah came running across the circle to the fire in tears. "Can you help me find Dr. Loring?" "Find?" Ranger's ears perked up. Ma was already on her feet. "I think he had supper with the Middletons. Is it your father, Sarah? Mr. Ferguson had been sick for 2 days now." Sarah nodded and let out a sob. "And Ma, too, now. It's bad. Oh, please, come quick."